Hi guys, it's Rob Flux here again from Property Developer Network, here for another live Sunday session. Have moved in from the back deck this week into my study, and it's largely because the light is getting a little bit dark outside. It's not that I'm afraid of the dark, it's just that the camera doesn't pick up the light and that sort of thing. So thought that I would come inside, get a little bit of lighting on the subject. Doing it from my study, so I've actually got 3 screens going on here, so you might see me jump around a little bit. I can see a couple that are already jumping on, so Luke and Margaret and co, welcome aboard folks, thank you very much. This week's subject is going to be called the missing middle, which is the future of developments moving forward. I can see Luke says marathon done. Good on you, mate. I don't know how you do that. A lot of effort going into running marathons. I applaud you for that much effort. My knees from playing years of rugby will not allow me to run anymore. So I applaud you for putting that sort of champion effort in. As I was saying, this week's session is the missing middle. I'll go into that in a little bit of detail first, but while I'm waiting for a few people to jump online, just to give you a little bit of news and views as to things that are going on around the place. Obviously, because Easter is coming up, we actually had our Brisbane meetup 1 week early this week. We actually had that yesterday, had a very good session there, talking about how to become an area expert, and a really great real deal from Rod Dashavisi. Always great to have real deals going within the network. So I guess, and great learning from, I guess, the industry experts each month as well. Our next meeting is scheduled in Sydney on the 27th. So wanted to, I guess, give everyone in Sydney the heads up on that. That is also a long weekend. That's the Anzac Day weekend, but we will be definitely coming to town and running the show there. So please make sure that you come and enjoy that as well. So I know that that's going to be a great one as well. So I can see a few more jumping on. So Michael, Shelley, Alex and co. So welcome folks, and thank you for coming. I guess wanted to give everyone a heads up that there is always a lag between what I am saying here and what questions are actually asked. So I encourage you, if you've got any questions that you want to ask, I encourage you to ask that early, and that allows, I guess with that lag time, allows me to actually see that and actually respond in a timely manner. So giving you the heads up on that. Okay, so this week's topic, as I said, is the missing middle. That's an industry terminology, I guess, in the more upper echelons, in the more professional ranks of property development. And it's referring to the fact that the way that we used to do property developments in the past used to be large lots of urban sprawl, as the suburbs would actually just go out and out and out. And to some extent that is still continuing today. But I guess the days of that going, I guess I'm not going to say are gone, but the things are changing, and there's a number of things that are actually leading into that. And so it's either been urban sprawl, or alternatively, it's been large unit apartments. And those two sorts of demographics where the big players used to play, I guess isn't really going to be where the developments of the future are going to be. And so it's very much set for, I guess, small scale developers such as ourselves to actually have a great deal of opportunity through the process. And there's going to be lots of things that are called infill development that are opportunities for us that are too small for the big guys. So how and why are the demographics of this changing? So let's have a look at what's actually happening around the place. So firstly, we have an aging population. I guess the baby boomers of the past, they were the ones who, I guess, set the great Australian dream of the big backyard. And for many, many years, that contributed to the urban sprawl that we had, because everybody wanted that large big backyard for the kids to play in and grow up, all that sort of thing. But what we're finding is that aging population is now getting to a point where that big backyard is actually starting to become a little bit of a burden. And as they are getting to the point where they're wanting to go into retirement, they're finding that they're also struggling a little bit with having funds available to them. And so there's a very large temptation to cash in those big backyards and move to something that has a lot more low lifestyle, low maintenance type lifestyle, and also something where the grey nomads can, I guess, park up, go for a lap of Australia or a lap of the world, and then come back, and property is pretty much exactly as they found it. So there's a very large temptation to be selling down those old large backyards. On top of that, we've also got a younger generation that's coming through, and that younger generation is equally in a point where they don't really want the responsibility of owning a backyard. I mean, there are some exceptions to that, obviously, but you know, the cafe latte lifestyle is meaning that many people are not wanting the responsibility that a big backyard actually responds to. And so when you combine those couple of elements, and then I guess the last element, which is housing affordability, we've got property prices, especially in places like Sydney and Melbourne, getting to a affordably out of reach. Is quite difficult as well. So even if you think that you can actually purchase something like that, or actually don't lend themselves to that fact. And it's getting to the point where people are, out of both necessity and out of lifestyle, are in a situation where they're needing to downsize on the types of properties that they actually live in. Now, so whilst that's the case, I guess there's some compounding things that make all of that even worse. So what we've got is we've got a situation where over the next 25 years, we're going to have nearly 10 million people that are going to be requiring a new home in Australia. That's either through new births, net migration, or a number of other elements. And I guess when you look at 10 million people over 25 years, that's about 400,000 people per year that are needing a new home. Now, 400,000 people per year, and on top of that, if we look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, we've got about 2.6 people per home. So when you have a look at that, that's approximately 160,000 new dwellings that need to be created every year. And it's not going to happen by continuing that urban sprawl, because people are getting further and further away from where they actually work. And instead, what they're wanting to do is have lifestyle that is convenient, both geographically and also lifestyle-wise. So those elements, we're needing smaller properties effectively, and going to fit in the gaps of where the properties actually are. It's called infill development. So effectively, where there's an existing house and another existing house, we're going to try and squeeze something in the middle. So there's hence it's called the missing middle, and hence it's called infill development. Now, when we look at all of those people that are needing somewhere to live, 80% of those people are actually going to be living in the 4 major capital cities. So that's Melbourne. That's going to get about 92,500 people per year net migration. Sydney's going to get about 82,000 net migration. Southeast Queensland's going to get about 72,000 per annum. And Perth is going to get about 70,000. So those 4 cities are going to take the bulk of that growth. And so they're all the places where, if you're looking to do these small scale developments, they're the places that you really want to be concentrating on with regards to, I guess, the likelihood of success in finding opportunities. Now, that's not to say that there won't be other opportunities in other places. There certainly will. But obviously, where the bulk of the people are going, then the bulk of the opportunities are going to be as well. So that will also equally lend itself to people who do long-term and hold type strategies. Obviously, there's ebbs and flows in the market as that goes, but with that much extra demand coming into those 4 markets, it will mean that there was going to be a long-term steady growth in all 4 of those markets. Even though what you're seeing at the moment is a little bit of a depression in Sydney and Melbourne, I don't think, when you look at the underlying core demographics and that sort of thing, the fundamentals that sit there, I don't think that that's really something that's actually going to stay for a lifetime. So sorry, for a while, I should say. Now, I can see a number of other people have joined, so I'll just take the opportunity to say hello. Adam, Dion, Lisa, Adrian, Abdul, and Carol and co. So welcome all folks. Feel free to ask any questions, guys, with this missing middle side of things. I'm giving you at the moment just the background as to why it's going to happen. And I'm sure many of you are actually wanting to know what it actually is. So as I said, infill development. So it fits in the gaps of other things, and it's not the houses of the past, and it's not the units of the past. It's something that fits in the middle. So some of those things are going to be very dependent on individual councils, because each council has its own regulations in its jurisdiction, and they have a number of things that is that terminology-wise appear quite similar, but I guess from a functionality point of view are actually a little bit different as we go. So hi Diana, how are you? So can see her saying hello. So some of these things that are going to be things like granny flats. So granny flats is a great one where I guess that's been a little bit of a trend for some time, is to find particular councils that allow granny flats to exist. You have to be careful with granny flats, because some councils actually require that that the granny flat is actually occupied by a member of the family, and more particularly granny, hence the name. So places like Brisbane City Council, for example, you're allowed to build that. They call it a secondary dwelling, but it effectively is the same sort of thing. But it needs to be the one family member. Otherwise, it triggers some other bits of legislation. When you go to other councils, then that's going to be completely different. So what you can build and how you can use it are two completely different things. And I need to make that very abundantly clear to people. So when you get a development application, they will say what is allowed to be built, but it won't say what is that dwelling is actually allowed to be used for. Now, by way of example, a house can be used as a house. It can be used as rooming accommodation. It can be used as, I guess, a home office. It can be used as an Airbnb. So I guess council will approve for the building to be built, but how you then use that will then have what they call a use case in that instance. So Greg says cheers. So thank you, Greg. Cheers to you too, mate. Take the opportunity to take a sip. And while I'm taking a sip, Jim Mellor is not on board, but Jim graciously gave me some wild turkey long branch yesterday, which is what I'm sipping today. So anyone else who feels that they want to bribe me with love and affection, this is the sort of thing that will go a very long way. So feel free to keep plying me with more, and I'll give you as much value as I can get. Whether you can make sense of that or not is another thing altogether. I guess the next part of, if we go up the food chain other than granny flats, is small lot homes. So small lot homes, like I guess a larger lot home, but on a much smaller footprint. So councils are getting to the point where they're allowing small land sizes anywhere down to as little as 180 square meters. I've seen in some councils where that's allowed to be subdivided down, and a home actually built on there, which is not a townhouse or anything like that. It is actually a home in and of its own right, on its own title. So I guess that is becoming a little bit more acceptable in many councils. It's going to take a while before it's acceptable in all councils, but I guess that's something that you need to keep an eye on in your own particular jurisdiction. Another one which has been around for quite some time, so I can just see some questions coming through. No, Barb has just joined, so hi Barb, how are you? I thought there was a question, but feel free to ask questions, guys, because you don't want to hear me just rabbiting on. You want me to actually answer your problems, so or your questions. So please do. So one that's been around for quite some time is a duplex. So duplexes are going to become more and more common as we go by, and that's largely because, as I said, trying to squeeze more dwellings onto the same space. Now, you need to be careful with duplexes that they actually fit the individual zoning for the area. So in some councils, you can put a duplex onto a low density residential type zone, and others you can't. So you're going to be very, very careful what council allows you to do what in what jurisdiction. So Abdul's got a question here. So hi Rob, what areas in the south side are good for filler developments? So when you say the south side, Abdul, because I'm based in Queensland, I'm assuming you're meaning the south side of Queensland, but I guess New South Wales and Victoria are also south side. So where in particular are you referring to, mate? And because there's also a number of specific councils there. I'm not going to profess to be an expert in every council either. There are 517 councils Australia-wide. That's 517 different sets of rules, different layers of legislation, different names for zones, different terminologies in what they do. So I can talk very generally, but I may not be able to give specific advice in that regard, Abdul. South side of Brisbane, okay. So I guess the question that you're asking, Abdul, is very subjective. Firstly, based on what is your strategy? So are you doing subdivisions? Are you doing small lot housing? Are you doing granny flats? Are you doing rooming accommodation? All of those sorts of things, Abdul. I guess there's going to be different areas that are more profitable than the other, depending upon the individual strategy. That said, I highly encourage everyone who does the homework to actually work out where their strategy actually works to not share that with the world, because instantly you create competitors that are too lazy to do the work. If you're able to do the work and you're knowledgeable enough to do the work, then you should be the one that benefits from that. So Greg's got a question. Rob, I've heard from town planners recently that BCC are very supportive of reconfiguration of lot to smaller blocks with their own titles in situations where, for example, you may have a few standalone townhouses. Are you finding this to be the case? Seems a good outcome for council to still save the backyard as per their recent policy. I'm going to say, Greg, that those two things are quite tautological. Saving their backyard is what they're really trying to do in their low density residential areas. What you're referring to is in a LMR area, trying to subdivide those onto smaller lots, which you're actually allowed to do. And I've done that down to 207 square meters on one of my own projects. That's not really saving the backyard. That's just really creating much smaller backyards. So yes, they're accepting of it, have been for quite some time. It's actually part of I guess the in 2014 to actually allow that. The reference that you're talking to with regards to saving the backyard is something that came out of a thing called the Brisbane Future Blueprint. And that's really trying to protect that, I guess, the low density residential areas. And there's a couple of particular instances where there was some where you could create townhouses in those areas if you had large enough land lot sizing. So they've been trying to close that little loophole down. So hopefully that explains that little situation. So the next one would be triplexes. So triplexes you really do in low medium residential areas. I guess where you're on a very small lot of land, so it might be 600 square meters, for example, you might be able to get 3 townhouses on that side by side. Now, very much as Greg just touched on there, depending upon the configuration of that lot of land, and whether or not you can actually lay that out in such a way that they all have direct street frontage, things like not having a shared common area, you may be able to create those so that they have a title and they don't have a body corporate. In most instances, that's not going to be the case though, and they will likely need a body corporate of some description. But essentially, that's utopia if you can actually get them to be individually strata titled. So let's get a question. With these types of projects, can you describe how you would reduce build costs as much as possible? Love your work, mate. So thank you, Liam. Appreciate that. I might touch on that at the end if that's okay, if we've got time, and I'm pretty sure that we will have time. It just kind of deviates from the topic of the day, Liam, and probably build cost is probably a a topic in and of itself. So rather than distract from today's chat, I might see if I can see if there's any time at the end of that just to touch on that. So I've just seen Carmel jumped on board. Hi, Carmel. How are you? Next one is a thing called courtyard apartments. Now, they're not very common in Australia so far, but they have been very common in the US for quite a lot of years. Effectively, whilst it is still a townhouse style layout, it's built in such a way where, if you can imagine, this is one, well, I'm trying to do this backwards in the camera. So this is one townhouse, another one, and you put one back, so you're actually getting a shape like that, and it creates, oh, that, I can't do that backwards. You get a shape like, there we go, shape like that, which then means you got one here, and one here. So 3 courtyards, for example, and in the center is the courtyard. And you turn that into a common area where it's a playground, or it's a pool, or some sort of common use area where everyone can actually get together, barbecue area, that sort of thing. So that's a courtyard type apartment. You don't see many of them in Australia. As I said, it's very popular in the US, but they are going to become a lot more popular in the future as we start to downsize our lot sizes and the like. Jesse's got a question. Hi, Rob. Any experience in removing a few native paperback trees on a site with a high level biodiversity overlay, specifically in a suburban subdivision? So Jesse, I might, as that's not quite on topic today, as with the question I just had from Liam, I might try and save that to the end if I can, and I'll just keep on topic. And if time allows, I'll come back to that if that's okay. Cool. Now, next one is townhouse apartments. So townhouses are obviously quite common already, but as we move forward, they're going to become more and more common, and more councils are going to be allowing them. What you'll find is they're actually going to start to change shape somewhat. As we get smaller and smaller lots, we're actually going to get skinnier and skinnier townhouses. And rather than nice, big, fat, wide ones that we've had in the past, they're going to get skinnier and taller. So you're going to see a lot more 3-story townhouses. And specifically, they're going to take shapes in what they actually call a terrace home. So terrace homes, I guess what you have seen in Sydney in the start of the 19th century, where they were very, very tight, very narrow, potentially only 5 meters wide. That's going to become more and more common as we move forward, and we're going to start to go upwards rather than out in order to fit more and more people in. So yeah, so the next one that we'll find a lot more coming along is a thing called a multiplex. Now, a multiplex is actually a hybrid. So it's not quite a unit apartment, and it's not quite a townhouse apartment, but one large building which is actually, I guess, fully enclosed and has multiple people actually living within it. So they have their own living space that is in the style of a townhouse, but in the shape of a unit complex, if that makes sense. And quite often, similar to what I was saying before with that courtyard apartment, quite often they'll actually build it so that it's like, see if is that squarish? So that you've got 4 townhouses around the outside, and then in the center would be that courtyard style apartment. Again, so you can, the whole point that they're trying to get to is trying to create some communities within our living spaces, so we're not just stuck in little boxes, if that makes sense. Take the opportunity to take a little sip. Any other questions, please feel free to flick them through, folks. Oh, that's good stuff. And then I guess on top of that, there's also mixed use developments. So mixed use is where you've got, say, commercial downstairs and residential upstairs, and there'll be a lot of people where they actually live and work from the same premise. So that's going to become very, very common as well moving forward, as people can't afford to have both a commercial space and a residential space, so they'll start to blend those things together. Again, they are in existence already, but it's more the fact that it's getting to the point where councils are having to amend their planning policies to allow all of these different dwelling types that I've just touched on to exist in a lot more places and make the rules for creating them a lot easier to actually abide by. So I guess watch this space for all of those. Now, the good news for us, okay, the good news for us, as I said, the big boys used to be the ones that were creating all of that urban sprawl going out, and the big boys were also the ones doing the large unit apartments. So they will continue to do that, but the big boys can't really compete in this small scale infill development space. They simply can't scale down well enough to actually be commercially competitive because they just don't have the scale in what they're trying to actually do. So the beauty of that, as I said, there's going to be 160,000 of these dwellings required every single year. The beauty is that's 160,000 opportunities for us. Small scale developers, nice, sweet, easy to do type projects where we're not really competing with the big boys, we're just competing with ourselves. And at this moment in time, there's not enough of us to actually be beating each other up either. So it's a massive hole in the landscape at the moment as to what is actually needed to be constructed. And so it's a massive opportunity for anyone wanting to do that. The great news is that as that demand, I was talking about, I guess, that massive amount of population growth, as that starts to grow, these small in-scale developments are just going to become more and more profitable in those big four capital cities that I was talking about. So that's Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. So anyone living in those areas, I would be starting to get to know your policies really well, get to know your councils really well, and have a look for where they're making changes. So by way of example, New South Wales, you've got the Complying Development Code that's just about to be updated on the 1st of July. And some massive changes that are coming to allow a lot of this new dwelling types to be approved as what they call a fait accompli. So basically, if you comply with the rules, then it doesn't matter what council you're in. The state government has said, well, if you comply with the rules, we're making the same rules across the entire state. If you comply, then council has no choice but to accept that. Now, if you want to know more about that, in particular, we actually have a special guest, Michael Lucidi from the New South Wales Planning Department, who is actually going to be coming in for a special event for us and running that. It's not our normal monthly event. It's actually going to be on a Friday night, and the date is just eluding me at the moment. I'm pretty sure that Shelley's on board. So Shelley, if you can remind me of the date, I think it's Friday the 9th of May, but I could be incorrect there. So just watch for Shelley's post here, and she'll be madly looking up that date in the background. Anyone who knows me, I'm very terrible with dates. Don't remember the wife's wedding anniversary or her birthday or anything like that. I get in a hell of a lot of trouble at home. So Michael's got a question. How are you finding lending at the moment? Lending is very difficult, Michael. It is absolutely very difficult at the moment. There's a number of things that are leading into that. There's been a whole bunch of, in the last 18 months, every couple of months, the rules are changing on what that lending is. The banks are getting very, very conservative in their approach. I've found in the last 2 years, I've not even attempted to get a bank loan, and instead I've been using private money partners for all of my projects. It's just really depending upon your, so Shelley's just said the 10th of May. Thank you, Shelley, appreciate that. So depending upon your personal connections and that sort of thing, the access to money is getting quite difficult. If you can do things commercially, if you can do commercial loans rather than residential loans, then things become a lot easier. I'd highly recommend investigating your commercial capabilities in that regard. So if you're doing 4 or more dwellings, then you will automatically be commercial. And if you're doing $1 million plus type projects, you have the potential to be commercial. The beauty about commercial is it allows you to defer your interest to the tail end in what they call capitalizing. And it also allows you to have the deal assessed on the merits of the deal rather than the income that you actually generate from a serviceability point of view. Hopefully that helps that. Michael's got a question on the infill topic. In the LMR area, is it possible to convert Queenslander into units? So in theory, yes, you can, Michael, and I know people that have actually done that. The challenge with the old Queenslanders is because they're actually made of wood, the fire compliance and fire separation in between the units becomes quite challenging. The way that I've seen that most successfully done is not horizontal breakup of the home, but rather vertical breakup. So you can actually put the fire check, I guess, in between the floors. It's much easier to actually do that. Then you've got a unit downstairs and a unit upstairs. So I've seen that done several times, but if you're trying to do them on the same horizontal plane, that becomes quite challenging fire compliance wise, because everything's made of wood, and as you know, fire and wood don't really play well together. So hi Corin, how are you, mate? A little bit late on, but welcome nonetheless. Now that was pretty much all I had to say on the topic today of I guess the missing middle. Encourage some questions. I might go back and ask some of the questions that were off topic, but I highly encourage anyone who's got any questions on topic to jump in if they can or will. So the off topic questions, I'll go back, was Liam. So in a general sense, with these type of projects, do you describe how would you reduce the build costs as much as possible? Build costs, as I said, Liam, this is going to be a topic in and of its own right. And I'm actually talking to a couple of builders and estimators at the moment, and potentially going to turn this into a one-day event as to how you can actually estimate your building costs more appropriately, and also how you can more cost effectively build. So if it's going to take an entire day to present, it's going to be hard to summarize here in 2 or 3 minutes. But the long and the short of it is, it really comes down to the first challenge you've got is what's the foundations going to be like? So is it a flat block of ground? What's the soil type like? That sort of thing. Is there rock under the ground? So there's a lot of variables that actually go into actually setting yourself a base platform to build on. Once you've got the base platform, so that can change significantly. It could be sloping block, it could be rock foundations, it could be acid sulfate soils, and a whole bunch of things like that are going to determine what that base foundational layer is. So there's a whole bunch of costs associated with actually estimating that. You need to do soil tests to actually understand how that is. But once you've got that, then what goes above that is really an engineering decision. So if you're trying to do multiple stories, but a single story, that keeps your cost price down as low as humanly possible. If you're going multi-story, then obviously the engineering of the ground floor needs to be structurally strong enough to actually take the weight of the upper floor. So, and there's challenges in how you actually do that. And there's also some, best practice measures to make the cost of building that from an engineering perspective a lot easier. So you've got the room above and the room below needs to line up. If there's overhangs and things like that, then that becomes where the engineering becomes a little bit more challenging. So the more boxier the look, probably the cheaper it is to build, because engineering wise, everything is going to be structurally in alignment. So hopefully that answers, Liam. And then on top of that, it then comes down to what fixtures and fittings you're actually going to put in there. Now I can see a couple of other questions coming through. Shelley's just put the link to that Sydney meetup for the Complying Development Code. So thank you, Shelley. I appreciate that. So anyone who is in Sydney or Newcastle or anywhere in New South Wales based, I highly recommend coming to that Complying Developments Code presentation on the 10th of May. So we will be promoting that any tick of the clock. So I guess watch out for that. If you are an annual member, you'll be able to come to that for free, but for everyone else, it'll be $25. So thank you for that. So Jim's joined. Hi, Jim. How are you? Thanks for jumping on, mate. You're at the tail end of it, mate, so you might have to hit rewind at the end of it. So Adam says, Rob, what do you personally think is a really good solution for the future of infill housing? It's always, Adam, subjective to the site, subjective to the council, and subjective to the zoning that you're actually on. But I'm going to see that there's going to be lots of 2-packs, 3-packs that become more and more the norm. Keeps the residential funding and construction nice and handy. The challenging part at the moment, trying to make that cost effective, is that typically you need to keep the existing house in place because of the intrinsic value in that existing house. So it's adding to the back rather than demolishing and building new is probably the most likely to be, I guess, the best solution. And no, there is no perfect missing middle dwelling. But one of those things that I didn't touch on, sorry, I accidentally skipped over, the fact that of most of these new dwelling types, small self-contained rooms within an existing house, there's a lot of things that you know, in a rent per room type capacity. So keep it zoned as a house or rated as a house, but have it fully self-contained. So each bedroom has its own ensuite and has its own little kitchenette. They are also going to become quite popular and out of necessity. So depending upon the jurisdiction that you're in, you can generally have anywhere from 4 to 5 unrelated people in that same house. So that's 4 or 5 sets of rent. I personally do a lot of that already. I'm at one point I had 29 rooms that I did rent out individually. I'm now down to 19 at the moment. So you know, great for cash flow and great for a couple of other things. Now I'm going to go back and answer another off-topic question, as I promised to do if time allowed. So any other on-topic questions, please add them in at the moment. So I think Jesse had one here. So hi Rob, any experience in removing a few native paperbark trees on a site with a high level biodiversity overlay, specifically for inner suburban subdivision? So Jesse, by coincidence, the real deal that we actually had presented in our Brisbane meetup yesterday was by a gentleman by the name of Rod Dashavisi. We actually record those meetings, but he had lots and lots of trouble with a protected tree in that particular presentation. I highly recommend, if you are not already an annual member, that you become one and actually go and watch that presentation, because there are lots and lots of lessons to deal with in that regard as to how you treat that and how council actually responds to issues and challenges on those sorts of things. So it's a matter of protecting not only the upper layers of the tree, but also the root bowl underneath. And if you're going to be doing any work in and around that root bowl, that you have to make sure you've got the appropriate permits, planning permissions, and that you're not doing anything that's going to inhibit the ability for water and fertilizer and that sort of thing to have that tree keep on flourishing. So me personally, no, I don't have the experience, but I can. That's the most recent one, but I know a number of other people that have actually got similar type issues. The thing with biodiversity overlays in any description, you're going to have to actually engage with both an arborist for the tree to actually identify the tree species, the tree age, the tree size, the girth of the tree, the healthiness of the tree, etc. And you're also going to have to engage with an environmental person to actually write the appropriate report to determine whether or not that biodiversity overlay and that tree actually belong together. Is it a protected tree? Is it actually, does it belong in that particular area? Sometimes they can argue one way or the other depending upon what else is in and around it. So if it's just one tree, you may have a good argument. If it's one amongst many, then it might be quite challenging. The thing that I would say with biodiversity though is in most councils, it is what they call an aspirational overlay. And by that it means it doesn't somebody way back in the past may have actually lopped the trees down, and you may have clear land with the exception of one tree, but council actually want to see that area grow back and flourish. That's what I say by aspirational, that they want that to happen, because what they're finding is as suburbia has sprawled out, it's knocked out all these different areas of vegetation, and our native animals are living in small little pockets all by themselves. And so these aspirational overlays is going to allow a number of these pockets to join up and allow our native species, our flora and fauna, to actually roam between a number of them rather than just living in one small little habitat, if that makes sense. So that being the case, folks, we're 40 minutes in, and it doesn't appear like we've got any other questions in the on the topic of the week, which is the missing middle, developments for the future. So I'm just going to take a little sip while you gather your thoughts and see if there's any more. Otherwise, I might call it a day. Always a little bit of a lag here. So I'll take the time just while we're wrapping up and waiting for any last questions. Our next upcoming event is in Sydney on the 27th of April. That, as I said, is a long weekend. It's the Anzac Day weekend, but we are actually running the event anyway. So please make sure if you're in Sydney that if you're free, if you haven't got away for the weekend, we would love to see you there. Also for Sydney is the 10th of May for that Complying Developments Code presentation by Michael Lucchetti from New South Wales Planning Department. And also anyone in Melbourne, we are running our inaugural event there on the 4th of May. So, or May the 4th be with you. So anyone in those states, we would love to see you there. So Greg's got one other question. I had to pay for 2 trees to be planted for permission to be granted to remove 1 tree. A good trade-off for me and the local critters. Yes, Greg, quite often they will allow something like that. It really is subjective to whether or not the tree that you're removing is of a species type that is protected and an age and size that means it would take 30 or 40 years to actually get back to that state. Whereas when you're planting a sapling, even though you're planting 2 of them, it's going to take quite some time for it to actually get in that place. So quite often that's subjective to the council, and it's also subjective to what it is actually getting protected. But yes, you are right. Council, in many instances, can be quite pragmatic and quite helpful in that assistance, and I think that is a good trade-off. So. Okay, folks, well, as I can't see any more questions coming through, and I just saw Kim has just joined, so hi, Kim. Sorry, mate, we're just at the point of signing off. So I'm going to thank you all for joining me this week. And as always, the recordings, once I end here, the recordings take a couple of minutes to process, but then you can go back, rewind, and watch it again. Less than live, but still called live. So that's Facebook for you, right? So, okay, folks, that being said, I'll catch you all next week. Bye for now.